Hi everyone, welcome back to another cello lesson. I'm Justin Leopard with Consordini.com, and today I just want to go a little bit deeper into cello care, especially with different weather environments, because cellos can be a little bit finicky instruments, and they were instruments that were developed and designed during a period of time in a region of the earth that was very cold, which was Europe about 300 years ago. So the number one thing as a result of that is a danger for cellos, and indeed all string instruments, has got to be heat, in addition to just being submerged underwater. Heat and water are the two things that are going to do the most damage to the instrument, but we're going to get to some other things that matter about cold and dry climates as well. But the main things to remember about heat are, don't leave your instrument directly in the sunlight where it's going to be getting the radiation of the heat. Don't leave it definitely in front of a radiator or just somewhere where there's not going to be a radiating heat source into the cello. And the reason for this is twofold. One has to do with the varnish on the instrument melting. The other has to do with the glue holding the cello together melting. One time I was playing outside in the sun thinking, oh, this won't matter. And later, I get the cello out in a cooler environment, and I hear a popping sound, and a seam had opened up on the instrument. Basically, it happened exactly where the sun was beating down on it. So it definitely happens, definitely a real thing, and probably already a little obvious to not play the cello in heat. The other thing is humidity changes, and it's actually the changes of humidity that make a bigger difference per se than one or the other. So don't feel bad if you live in a humid climate or if you live in a dry climate. Both of those things are actually totally fine. But what you want to be careful about are when the seasons are changing, because if you have a lot of moisture in the instrument and then you go into a drier climate or a drier season, what can happen is that the moisture leaves the instrument and then the instrument can crack. Or vice versa, the moisture can come into the instrument and cause it to perform odd, or the moisture combined with the varnish or the rosin on top of the varnish, or just contribute to some seam opening problems as well as heat can. Cold is not as big of a deal for cello. Don't worry too much about taking your cello out through the cold if it's in a case. But what can happen with the cold is that the humidity often changes as well, and the humidity will play a part in the instrument. The worst thing to happen is a crack, so hopefully we don't want to have that. So having covered the most important things, the catch-all, absolutely do not leave your cello where it's going to be changing humidity, or especially where it's going to be too wet. Also, don't leave it where it's going to be too hot. Those things are both going to do a lot of damage to the instrument, and you just want to avoid them entirely. Below that tier of extreme with the cello, we have some sort of basic routine things that we can do to help the cello be better. So especially when you're in the heat, it's very important to have a cloth, ideally something microfiber, something that's just going to do a good job. You can put it underneath the bow like this and wipe the rosin that falls onto the stick that way. The same thing to just sort of clean off your fingerboard and the strings, and also you can see all of this glorious fallen rosin going away. Now the reason why we do this, in addition to wanting to make sure that the cello looks nice and everything like that, is because varnish on top of the cello melts at relatively low temperatures. By the time you're already in 90 or 100 degree weather, it's already hot enough for the varnish to melt. And what can then happen is that the rosin that's still on, and I missed a spot, the rosin that's still on can actually bind chemically with the varnish as it re-dries. And it's just kind of a nasty business. So generally, you wipe down the instrument, especially when it's hot. But in general, you want to wipe down the instrument. When you are changing climates, or you're going into winter, you're going into a colder time, a lot of people use a product called a damper, which I'll show on screen. Basically, it's this little snake. It has a sponge in it, so you get it wet, but then you dry off the rubber outer coating so that the sponge inside has moisture, and you just slip it into the F-hole here. This way, the cello is able to get a little bit of extra moisture. I know especially violinists like to use orange peels in their case. This is another humidification method. This one you do not have to do. Some people are against it even on the basis that you're introducing even greater extremes of humidity change, but definitely go with your region, go with what you've been finding for the cello. And if you have a private teacher that you're working with, ask them, because they also know the region that you're in better and how to use it for cello better. Okay, so one of the other things that you could do, because I've talked a couple times already about varnish, and if you have a lot of nicks like I do, eventually I will want to get these fixed, just because the wood, you don't want something bad to happen to the wood that's beneath the varnish. For now, they're small. It's mostly okay, but before I had gotten this cello, actually there's a new one for me, so I guess I have to consider that. But before I got this cello, it was actually way worse than it is even now. And this black that you might be able to see here was a white section like this that was like all the way over. And that just happened from accumulated time with the finger oils basically just stripping away that paint. So you definitely don't want to not have varnish. And for that end, especially if you're playing with a shirt that has buttons on it a lot, or a zipper, you don't want to repeatedly scratch the back of your instrument. So some people will put a little cape on the cello, or just use some sort of cloth if you're in a situation where you do have buttons, or, I mean, if you're performing in an orchestra, you'll have a suit that probably has buttons. So it's a good thing to be aware of, not scratching up the back of your cello, trying to just be careful not to scratch up your cello. The occasional nick, I mean, it really is okay, but also socially, some people make a really big deal out of it, a bigger deal than I do. So for that reason too, you might want to never get a nick on your cello. But I'm here to tell you that from a cello safety perspective, it is okay as long as eventually you deal with the nicks. And the way that they fix them is they fill it in. They fill it in and they revarnish it. It's as simple as that. All right, so the final things that I just want to note about the cello: try to leave it in its case. If you get a cello stand for it, make sure that it's in a room that has consistent weather. The case really is doing a good job, if you've gotten a decent case, of protecting against certain weather things. So use the case. Even though it's harder to maybe get to the cello, so it's okay to get a cello stand. I do recommend it if you're struggling to get the cello out to practice and it's always in your bedroom or living room or something. But use the case. Don't let anything fall on it. Don't let anything really hot or really wet near the instrument. Treat it with the respect of anything that's as expensive as these things are, while having fun playing music. And make sure to clean it. Be aware of things like bow rehairs and string rehairs, but just don't let any impacts or weird temperature or moisture things happen to it, and make sure to clean it off. So I hope this video has been helpful in giving you a framework for the normal things that you're going to have to deal with cello. I don't think it's too crazy. Some of it is commonsensical, but I think it bears repeating, and I'm happy to be the one to share it if this is the first time you're hearing some of this information with you. All right, so thank you guys for watching. We appreciate you watching all of our cello lesson videos. We really appreciate you guys having us. Once again, I'm Justin Leopard with Consordini.com, and we'll see you next time.